Buddhism. So, in our previous installment in the World Religion series, we've been looking at classical polytheism and the rise of Hinduism. Now we're going to look at Buddhism, the second of the Dharmic religions. So, the story of the Buddha. So, Gautama Buddha, who is the historical Buddha, he was born as a prince in the northeast part of India, up near the Ganges River. Now, at birth, according to legend, it was predicted. Now, he was described as being born with several traits that were seen as remarkable. And in Indian culture, these included a knob on the forehead, a slight webbing between the fingers, and other anomalies that instantly marked this child out as important or special. And it was said at his birth that it was predicted that he would either become a great king or a great religious leader. And in some versions of the story, it was actually predicted that if he stayed in the palace, he would become a great king. And if he left, he would become a great religious leader. So, his father, wishing him to become a king, kept him sheltered from all the evils of the world for as long as he could, and kept him within the palace. However, young people do eventually journey out into the world. And it is one of these occasions which we will now discuss. The events which bring about his conversion from a king into a spiritual leader. So the prince journeys outside the palace. So, in the biography of the Buddha, it's described that he journeyed outside of his palace 4 times before he made the decision to begin a life of spiritual contemplation. And on the first time he went out, he saw an old man. Old, bent over, aches and pains, all of that. And he was horrified at the prospect of old age. He went out again and he saw a sick man, ill and dealing with his illness. On his third journey out about the city, he saw a corpse being carried to a funeral pyre. And finally, on a 4th journey, he saw a mendicant holy man. That's a holy man who had given up all of his worldly possessions, who was meditating and was at peace with the world. And seeing these 4 things instantly begins to take an effect on him as he begins to think more about human suffering and looking for a way to surpass that suffering. He sees the suffering of old age, illness, and death, and he sees a holy man who seems to be at peace and defying that suffering. And he wants part of that peace. And so eventually, the young prince abandons the throne and goes out into the forest and out into the wilderness, searching for a religious life. And he meditates, he journeys among other holy men, and after a period of great meditation and contemplation, he achieves total enlightenment. And it's this process he becomes the Buddha, the enlightened one, as they call it. And this is the beginning of his ministry and the beginning of the Buddhist religion. So, we're going to begin by looking at Theravada Buddhism, which is most likely the earliest. Now, Theravada means the small vehicle. It's not quite as complicated as Mahayana Buddhism, which we'll discuss a little later. So let's begin with Theravada Buddhism. So, one of the major ideas in Theravada Buddhism is the 4 Noble Truths. And these ideas are as follows. 1, that there is suffering in the world. 2, that attachments are the cause of all suffering. 3, there is a state of non-suffering, known as nirvana. And 4th, that in order to reach nirvana, one must follow the 8-fold path. So let's begin with the first one, the most obvious of the 4, that there is suffering in the world. That is the kind of the baseline that we're all coming from. That's something that most people can agree on. There is suffering in the world. Now, the next idea is that attachments are the cause of all suffering. So, the idea that the Buddha is kind of getting at in this idea that what makes us suffer when things happen is because of our attachments to things. So look at the first 3 bad things the Buddha noticed. Old age, sickness, and death. So he looks at it and says, look, obviously old age is going to happen. But what makes us suffer when we get old is that we're attached to being young. We want to be young. We miss our beauty and our strength from when we were younger. And that the fact that we can't do the things we did when we were younger, or look the way we were when we were younger, or we've grown senile and we can't think the way we thought when we were younger, that causes pain, that causes suffering. And we suffer because of that. Or because we know it's coming and we know we're going to lose these things, that causes us to suffer. Same goes with illness, right? Where we're attached to our health. Even death, we're attached to our life. We want to keep living, and so the thought of not living causes us pain. It causes suffering. Or else that these things are caused by the attachments of others, right? We often kill people because we're attached to the things that they have that we want. Or we're attached to people that they have hurt, and we want vengeance. Or we're attached to something that we're defending, like a country or a kingdom, and they're threatening that. And so, ultimately, the attachment is the cause of the suffering. Then comes here that there's a state of non-suffering called nirvana. I'm going to get more into what nirvana is later, and the Eightfold Path. We're going to go into the Eightfold Path next. So this is the Eightfold Path. And it's right view, the idea of knowing the truth, right intention, freeing your mind from evil, having good intentions, right speech, not saying anything that would hurt anyone, right action, working for the good of others, right livelihood, having a respectful life, right effort to resist evil, right concentration to practice meditation, and right mindfulness, controlling your thoughts. So, karma and nirvana. So once again, karma emerges. Karma is back, and as reactions to our actions. We already went over karma with Hinduism, so it's the same basic process. Now, nirvana is a little different than moksha. So nirvana is the realization that we are fleeting, we have a fleeting nature. We're here and then we're gone. And as soon, and relinquishing all attachment. So unlike moksha, which is where which is the belief that we are one with a larger cosmic principle, nirvana is nirvana is the idea that we are kind of nothing. We don't, and once we are no longer attached to anything, we don't care about giving up ourselves and just disappearing and becoming nothing. That's when we reach that state of non-suffering. We don't care anymore. It doesn't matter to us about our possessions or our lives or our honor or anything. It's just, okay, it's all good. Don't have those attachments. And so the fact that things are fleeting doesn't affect us, right? In other words, even our happiest state cannot last forever, right? One of the reasons why many people talk about memory being so painful is we look back at happier times in our lives and we miss that. It couldn't last forever. And the fact that it didn't, that hurts. And so if you don't get attached to that, then you don't experience that pain. That's the idea of nirvana and of relinquishing attachments, if that makes any sense. So, Ashokan Dharma. So again, Dharma. In Ashokan Dharma, this was developed by a Buddhist king by the name of Asoka. And Asoka converted to Buddhism after he conquered another people and he massacred them brutally. And after that, he saw the results of his violence and he experienced a religious conversion to Buddhism. And he developed a policy of Ashokan Dharma, this general rule of righteousness, of non-violence and right living. And he tried to instill that throughout the kingdom as a general policy of non-violence, respect for various religious clerics, non-violence towards animals, etc. And he printed this on pillars and mountain inscriptions, and he hoisted these pillars bearing these inscriptions all over Mauryan India, which extended up from parts of what is now Pakistan all the way down towards the southern tip of India. And This is where the idea of a Soken Dharma, and what he's trying to do, he's trying to put the ideas of the Eightfold Path into a general Dharma policy, making it one's duty to obey these general Buddhist rules of the Eightfold Path and righteousness. That's what Asoka was trying to do. And so Mahayana Buddhism. So Mahayana Buddhism is a whole more complex cosmology in which there are multiple worlds, and each of these worlds has its own Buddha. There are multiple Buddhas, and multiple enlightened ones. Now there's also the concept of a bodhisattva. Now a bodhisattva is a being who is capable of achieving enlightenment. They've had that realization. They can become a Buddha, but they refrain from it. They don't do it because they want to stay on Earth and aid human beings. So they have an almost godlike persona within Buddhism, the bodhisattvas. And in Mahayana Buddhism, people will often pray to the bodhisattvas to ask for help with various things. So this is rather interesting about bodhisattvas because we see, this also is one of the reasons why Mahayana Buddhism caught on very widely, was the fact that unlike traditional Buddhism and Hinduism, which are very self-directed, it's about you trying to find your individual path to enlightenment. Once bodhisattvas became involved, it became more of a group religion. It was about people trying to help others to reach enlightenment. They had godlike beings that they could petition for help. And that's one reason why Mahayana Buddhism actually has spread so far throughout East Asia. And it's also rather interesting looking at the idea of a bodhisattva because it kind of defies some of what you'd think. Remember way back last class or so, way back when I asked you about with moksha, where I asked how many of you would risk the continued evils of existing. And I imagine if any of you said yes, you might be considered what they would consider. They would have considered you bodhisattva material. That you would be willing to stay in this cycle in order and to not get your own release from the cycle of reincarnations, so that you could try to assist others in achieving enlightenment. And that brings us to the end of our review of Buddhism. And I hope you enjoyed it.